Thank you for coming. My name is Richard Cooper. I am President and CEO of NYSpin. We'll take a few minutes to thank our sponsors, Thoughtworks, hosting our event tonight, CooperPresents.com, managing our website, Pearson Education, O'Reilly Media, Auerbach Publications, Pragmatic Bookshelf, and Wiley. We are considered a Category B continuing education provider. So if you're a PMP, you earn 1 PDU for being here tonight. So thank you all for coming. I'm going to turn this over to Bill.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I am really excited to be introducing our speaker for tonight. We are so lucky to be getting him when he's here in New York, because he has been in jobs in Atlanta. Sometimes he's in Florida. He just came back from a terrific vacation in the Virgin Islands. That's why he's got such a great tan, and he's worked for such unheard of companies as Coca-Cola and American Express, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Federal Reserve. That's a small bank somewhere in the. Was that in New York or was that
downtown? Downtown.
Right, downtown. So, as an Agile coach, and he's going to talk with us about something he's particularly passionate about, forecasting without fear. So here to tell us about forecasting without fear, Andrew Kazarinoff.
Thanks. I'm really delighted to be doing this. What I'm going to talk about comes from my experience as a Scrum Master and an Agile coach for the past 8 years. I went Agile in 2008. And before that, I had a fairly extensive background as a project manager and a business analyst and in the command and control world. And what I'm going to talk about comes from mainly my experience in companies like Coca-Cola and Federal Reserve and others as a Scrum Master and an Agile coach. The fear part comes from my history before I went Agile. And I think you'll, is everybody, how many people here are, shall we call, traditional project managers? Traditional project manager. Okay. Non-Agile, non-iterative, non-short feedback loops. Okay. Now the forecasting, what underlies Agile forecasting is short feedback loops, transparency, and the ability to respond to change. Now, traditional project management can use a lot of those ideas, and we'll possibly talk about that as we go along. Specifically, what I want to talk about, these things. Why you have to forecast and why it's not easy. There's a whole process, discipline of refining the so-called product backlog, organizing and prioritizing the work. And I'm probably using language everybody is familiar with. One of the techniques that's come into play recently, say in the past couple of years, that helps the refinement job and the prioritizing and the ordering of work items is cost of delay. And that I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, when do you forecast? You forecast what you expect to deliver in an iteration and or a release. And there are really two engines that allow you to forecast, that you can use to forecast this capacity and velocity. there are some situations of forecasting that I have always really disliked, and those include forecasting on fixed cost and using some techniques to forecast durations or deliverable dates based on burn rates. And those are really unpleasant techniques, and we'll not spend a lot of time on those. I talked to some people while I was putting this together about how they did forecasting in Kanban, for Kanban teams. And half of the people I talked with said, get out of here. We don't forecast in Kanban. This is impossible. It's not we don't do that. Well, there's some really good techniques. And touch on both of those. And I want to show a couple of examples of metrics that I've found resonate with senior leadership. Not to go tremendously deep into that, you are all probably using Rally or version 1 or other tools like that, so you get metrics out of that, and I don't have to tell you how to do that. Now, we're constantly being asked to forecast, and we're constantly being asked, can you deliver this? When can you deliver it? What's the date? And there are really legitimate reasons for being asked to forecast. And these are some of them, and they all equate to the need for predictability on the part of senior leadership. The guys that write the checks. And I heard somebody in the pizza department tonight talk about how it's very easy to say, no, we're agile, we don't forecast. But we do. And here's a guy, senior leader, friendly, very nice. He's got a roadmap, and he's got legitimate questions. What are we really releasing next? When are we releasing it? Can you meet the trade show date? And my reaction in the past was fear. And over the past right. And so when you're afraid, you tend to relapse into things that used to make you feel safe. Now, I don't know about crystal balls, but certainly the ever popular Gantt chart used to make me feel safe. And it actually increased the fear because I caught on eventually that the Gantt chart would always lie and my forecast would always be wrong. Anybody relate to that? Yeah. And so as I've gone along into the agile world way of working, I've looked for and I've experienced and I've developed some defensible ways to forecast. Some of them less robust than others, but certainly all defensible. And those are the ones that I want to talk about. What we're really looking for is a clear signpost, but very, very, very seldom do we get that. Why is it not easy to forecast? And this first bit has to do with the refinement that we're going to talk about, and the prioritizing, and the job of the product owner and the product management team to make the work relevant in terms of purpose, in terms of vision. And very often that's lacking, and product owners need a lot of coaching in that area because it doesn't come naturally to them. You relate to that a little bit? You're smiling.
Coach.
Yeah, right. And so we have other stuff that make a prediction of any kind very iffy. If you've got people working overtime and not working overtime, if you've got people working on 3 different projects, and so on and so forth. Not easy to forecast. Well, we don't call it commitment anymore. I've been using the word forecast. That's in the new Scrum Guide, and it's no longer the vocabulary, so it's forecast. You can think of getting from the vision to the work as a funnel, and that in that funnel, a process of refinement takes place. And you have possibilities for the business. Then we have themes, so-called. And we have initiatives, then features, and then finally user stories. And at this is the level at which the work takes place. The possibilities are in the domain, whatever it is, insurance, finance, whatever. The portfolio level contains the themes that get refined into programs, initiatives, features, at the program level, and then finally at the sprint level into user stories. And right about here is where it's really critical to do an orderly, robust, defensible prioritization of possibilities. And this is where we go into the technique of cost of delay and all the myriad approaches to estimating business value. But cost of delay, and I've been working with that for the past couple of years, is a really neat arithmetic, no argument when you're done with it kind of thing. And I want to show you just the bare surface of it. Cost of delay. We usually, the usual expression is opportunity cost. If I don't put this product on the market by June, I'm going to lose 8% of the share of market, or customers will simply lose interest in my product. And this is all wrapped up into what's called user value and time value. And then learning value is the value of learning a new technology, maybe getting a jump on the competition, and innovation of new opportunities. And Donald Bryanson has written a couple of books, and they're both very difficult to read, even more difficult to understand.
You've got to read it twice and take notes.
You've got to read. Twice didn't work for me. And one of them is the better known one is product development flow, and this is where this cost of delay idea has been developed. And there's a consulting firm in England that does something called black swan farming, has also developed this stuff. And fundamentally, this is all I'm going to show. If you see those 3 elements, user value, time, learning, you can use Fibonacci numbers. It's really hard to pin somebody down to dollar figures, but ideally you could do that. But these are Fibonacci numbers, and there are some weighted shortest job first, WSJF, is the job that you want to take on first. In other words, you're prioritizing all this based on this. You have the total points or total value, duration of each, call it project or product, and the total divided by duration. And if you were to do B first, you would get this much cost of delay. If you do the highest weight first, which is A, you have a significantly lower cost of delay. Now, if we have time, at the end of this I can go into more detail, but I just wanted you to be aware that this is sort of an up and coming, some people know about it, some don't, way of being objective about that translation of themes into initiatives, into features, part of the funnel. Now, when do you forecast? Well, we have the team level, we have the program level, and this is from SAFe. This is a way of looking at the system. It's more at the SAFe. You don't have to do everything that Scaled Agile Framework suggests, but at the very minimum, it gets you started with what's called systems thinking. It gets you started thinking above and beyond the team level. And so where do we plan, or where do we forecast? These two places. The team level, which is sprints, and the release, the program level, which is a cadence of releases. Not literally a cadence, but it's a sequence of releases. Okay, there are tools, there are ways to forecast. Our options are capacity, velocity, Little's Law.
What's the third one?
Hmm?
What's the third one?
Little's Law. And then these very unpleasant ways of forecasting based on cost and burn rate, and yesterday's weather as a technique of forecasting in Kanban, as is Little's Law, and I'm going to show you how that works. Here's a sprint forecast. If you don't know your velocity, you have no velocity history, all you know is how many people you have on the team. You've decided your sprint length will be 2 weeks, and that really gives you a capacity in, call them ideal hours. There's a whole we shouldn't call it science, but estimating real capacity, which I'll show you next. So you have 216 developer hours available of capacity. And so what you do is you have your features and stories, you estimate the tasks up to the development capacity. Bet you never thought of that before. It's really simple, really simple. And so you don't go all the way up to 216, maybe 190, 100, 200. And that gives you, if you can imagine these being pulled over, these gives you the stories and tasks and features for the sprint forecast. And that's pretty good, but it's important to make sure you're talking about real capacity. Already, If you have a team size of 7, 10 days, you have ideal days of 70. We know effort focus brings that down. And so real days, 60% of 70 is 42. It gets worse. The news gets worse. Anybody know what's coming? If it's a brand new team, you're not going to get even 42. Okay? And there's a nice little progression. So that, effort focus, real days 42, but 60% of that is efficiency in the first sprint, and the real capacity is a lot less than you might have dreamed. And it goes up to 80, 90, 100. And it's something to watch as you're spinning up teams. Now, what about velocity? Velocity is what?
Well, what if it's not a new team, but it's still a new project? When you still lose something in the first sprint?
Make an allowance for the first sprint. Nice point. Yeah, it's not as drastic as this. Good. All right, what about velocity? If you don't have a velocity history, what do? You back into it. And here we have Mike Cohn to thank. A very simple idea. Again, using capacity and backing into velocity. The first thing he says is you have some part of a backlog and you size it, Fibonacci. Then you define the tasks for each one of these stories. You estimate the task hours. And then you look at your capacity. And the capacity is let's say your development team is 5 people, usable hours per day, sprint days 10 with a 2-week sprint, team capacity is 300 hours. You certainly can't do all these stories. You can't forecast that you're going to do all these stories, can you? So you add up the task hours that gets you fairly close in the neighborhood of the capacity. And look at that. You've already sized them. And so this is an implied velocity. 13 and 5 and 8 and 8. Now, an even quicker and possibly just as useful way. Huh?
Go ahead.
Yeah, by the way, we have a small group. We have I don't know how lots of time, but break in. If it's a complicated question, we'll do a parking lot, but I heard mutterings there. Dean Leffingwell says, we really don't want to go through all of this.
Let's just use points.
Yeah.
Just use points.
Yeah. 8 points per developer and tester. So if you have a development team size of 5, it's 8 points per head. Your starting velocity, your nominal velocity on the basis of which you will do your original forecasting, your first forecasting, which of course you will refine. You're going to be nowhere near the real thing, but this is a way to start. And so we have, instead of forecasting the sprint on the basis of capacity, we now have a way of forecasting on the basis of velocity. So we have a little bit of a history, or we just use 40. In fact, that's what I've done a lot of the time. We estimate the story points for the candidate stories and select up to the average velocity. And then we have a forecast of features and stories. Not so fast. Suppose our velocity isn't 40. Suppose it's 30. Some chunk of this is going to be very probable, right? Yeah. And there's some likelihood that we may be right about our velocity of 40. And then if it's 50, well, it's not likely. So only part of this is going to be actually delivered. And the boss had better know this. Takes a little bit of courage to get this across. Okay, you remember the funnel themes? Let's say Amazon. There are initiatives, features, stories in the funnel. And Jeff Bezos must have asked somebody about a release forecast every once in a while. And so we can do a release forecast. How do we do that? Let's say we release every 3 months. That's 12 weeks. How many sprints is that?
It's 2-week sprints.
2-week sprints, 6. And so if we have a velocity of 40 nominally, then we have a story point bank of 240 against which we will forecast. And so we estimate the story points in the backlog and we select up to the bank. And we have the same thing. You can actually build probability distributions around this. It needs a lot of data, so it's kind of a longer term prospect. Can't do that right away. But you see what's happening here is you're translating story points into what senior leadership can understand, which is the features. And we're probably not going to deliver this feature in this release. We're very likely to deliver these two and probably the third one, populate cart, probably not. It's unlikely that we'll hit a velocity of 50. Now, we really have to have a way, we need a way to size features. And the best, easiest way to size features is by affinity estimation. You know, we got small to large. I don't know what happened to large, but we take each of these features and map them essentially from small to large affinity-wise. Is this a little larger than this one? Are these two about the same? And this works for story point estimating of features. We don't have to add the story points of stories to estimate features. That's the really long way around, and you're not buying that much predictability. A couple of standard other techniques. These two are really the most useful. And I have used this affinity estimating for story points and cost as well. Miraculously, it works. I never thought it would, but it did. Yeah.
So for the affinity, it sounds like at the end of the release, you would need to go into some time to review all the features that went into that release and count how many story points you actually put into production.
You want to keep track of what's happening.
Yeah.
You want to keep track. You want to keep a history so that you're forecasting. You know, the forecasting funnel will get narrower and narrower. Terrifying question. When can you deliver this? You have a backlog, and you work with velocity. You estimate the backlog and story points. You factor in velocity, which gives you duration, which is the number of sprints, and then the calendar dates, the end date plus start equals start date plus the days. And if the backlog size, and by the way, I learned eventually never to give a single number to anybody, right? And so the backlog size we estimate as in a range. And we use 600 somewhere in the midpoint as the basis. And then we have, if our velocity is 30 or 40 or 45, we have different lengths, we have different durations, and those translate into, if we start today, a velocity of 40 will deliver that many points by July. Never give a single date. Never give a single number or a single date. And so I would say June to October. Now that may not be received very well, but the proviso is that we're going to keep this up to date, Mr. Senior Leader. We're not going to just sit there and wait the way we used to with Gantt charts to see what happens. No, we're going to keep track of this. And by the way, in traditional project scheduling, project management, you can actually shorten the feedback loops by doing mini waterfalls within your big waterfall. Right? You tried that? Sure. Now, another question is, what can you deliver by June or July 16th? Well, you turn this inside out. You have features, you size all the features, you calculate the sprints, you calculate the sprints, what? From today to July 16th, right? And you factor in velocity, and you have the total number of points that you're going to be able to deliver by July 16th. And by the way, can you deliver by July 12th or whatever it is? The answer is always yes. The answer is never, I don't know, right? They don't buy that. They don't buy, I don't know. They don't buy, I'll get back to you next week. The answer is always yes. And then, well, the total of all features is something like this of range. And we have a start date, end date. The number of sprints is 15. Calendar says so. And here we are. We can deliver 600 story points if we have a velocity of 40 and 450 if it's only 30 and so forth within this time band. Now, to this, you can do what I did earlier when I showed you the release forecast. I actually named the features that would be included. And you can do that here, and you should. Fixed cost forecast. Give me a break. If the fixed cost is $2,000, and I was dumb enough to accept the job, I'm dumb enough to say yes, there's nothing you can do. Select the features up to a fixed cost, and there you are. And you roll the dice. Now, you can also add the probability ideas to this. I know this exists. I know people do this. I know people ask for this. I try to avoid it. Okay. Based on burn rate. Burn rate is the cost of a team's work for a given interval of time. Right? Very quickly, the sum of all feature costs is some dollars, burn rate dollars per day. you divide, if it's a standing team, it's very simple. The total cost divided by the burn rate gives you, do a little dimensional analysis here. This is dollars, and this is dollars per week, and it comes out to be weeks, or duration in days. If no teams, then you start talking about, well, you know that the duration, if you want fast duration, you're going to have to increase capacity. Sort of like the old iron triangle, except we don't use that language anymore. And and yes, your burn rate will increase, but the duration will decrease, and you do a balancing act with the person who's asking you for a forecast based on knowing nothing but costs and costs. If you have a fixed ship date, it's a different kind of math, but it's the same, fundamentally the same kind of formula. Kanban. This is a, what is it?
Oh, that's a cumulative flow.
Cumulative flow diagram, CFD. I like this one particularly because it shows you very clearly the difference between cycle time and lead time. Took me a while. But cycle time is the time spent actually working on, let's say, code. And the lead time is the time that from when the work becomes available, from the start of the work till finish product. And yesterday's weather, we have a nice trend of done, and we can project that trend. And by the way, these are not sprints, these are times that you estimate, or times that you actually record what's happening. And then very simply, you can forecast the increment of functionality done at intervals of time. Better math here. Little's law says throughput rate is work in process divided by lead time. You turn this equation around, and the time you spend waiting in line at Starbucks is the number of people ahead of you divided by the rate that the coffee gets made. Okay. And you get the work in process and lead time from history. And by the way, read work in process as backlog. Release backlog, total project backlog, whatever. And so if we have 3 items every 2 hours, 1.5 items per hour, we do some math, duration to backlog divided by throughput rate, 180 items divided by 1.5 is 120 hours. Mind you, let's look at real hours, because that's really it'll give you the calendar time. And here it is. The real duration added to the start date will give you the delivery date. And this is a very, very powerful little formula, very powerful little concept. And you could always remember it by remembering Starbucks. How many people ahead of you? How many baristas how many cups of coffee get poured per minute, and that's the duration to delivery of your cup of coffee. Tricky here, we have to assume, in Kanban, you have to assume that work items are uniform, size, type. They come regularly into the team.
Does that really, does that really happen when you're developing new products for software?
Doesn't happen. Doesn't happen. Now, somewhere out of version 1 or Rally, you can get metrics like this, which essentially give you an idea when stuff is going to get done. A different way of forecasting. Rally has this now. It's packaged in the tool. For the past 5 years, I've watched people try to develop it themselves in Excel. Total failures, including my own efforts. Couldn't do it. But Rally's finally done it. Now, we've talked about refinement. We've talked about cost of delay, different kinds of forecasts, forecasting in Kanban, a couple of pictures of metrics. Now, your comment. What was your comment? Because this is the time to ask you for questions.
Well, my comment was simply, and I think you discussed it, is about really thinking about things in terms of story points instead of going into the details of hours, especially when coming up with an initial forecast. Because there's this whole big, I don't know if it's an argument or a discussion about story points and what they represent, and ultimately what it is, at least in my mind, is within a certain period of time getting things done. That's really what story points are. That's why in SAFE, we talk about, well, what is a story point? How do we baseline it? And a lot of people go and say, well, it's doing this, creating this, goes back to the database, and that's what one story point is. Well, no, not really. What it really is effort taken by people, a half day of testing time and a half day of development time, getting to the point of done, and that's one point. And I think it just makes things so much easier to look at, because you're not looking to be, you want to be kind of right, not precisely, because when you get into it, you're going to be precisely wrong instead of approximately right. So the thing you want to do is really, start with, here's what the baseline is. We're going to have some variance on it, but we're going to work to narrow that down. So it's also a tool for teams as well.
Right.
Like, well, here's what we thought it was. Here's what it turned out to be. Let's take a look at it. Why did this happen? And kind of see where our range is. So it's really a tool for teams in that regard. But it's also, helping the folks who are funding the project, our sponsors, our VC, or your executive management, and saying, well, here's how we're becoming more predictable. Here's we're eliminating the variance, which is like so important, especially in running a business. So, I think really making that connection is really, really important, because a lot of times people don't think about it. But that's something that
this is true.
Yeah, for teams and aligning teams all the way through to the people who are funding it, having that common idea of what that is helps.
Yeah. SAFE, of course, stresses the commonality, the comparison. That's completely contrary and much farther advanced than traditional Scrum.
Right.
but it's practical, it's pragmatic. The only qualification I would put on what you said, which I totally endorse from beginning to end, is that you have to have teams and not just working groups.
Right.
Right? You know, the difference.
What's the difference?
The difference is that a working group has, let's say, day-to-day agreements. A team has a shared intelligence, a collective intelligence that a working group does not yet have. That's, of course, a goal is important, but either one could have a goal, but it's the collective intelligence that is greater than the sum of the members that makes the difference. And there's the Lencioni 5 dysfunctions that if you have just a working group, you probably have not developed any trust yet, and commitment, and whatever these other things are.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Bill.
You had a chart, maybe it's one back or two back, maybe it's number 33. You said with using a tool like Rally, you could do things that just have been possible to actually create for yourself using Excel. That.
I wouldn't. No, I failed. I have failed.
What is it that's so difficult?
Better people.
How is it that people were failing, and that Rally figured out that no one? What is that we couldn't figure out? Just knowing what the work needs to be done. Rally's got to be doing something similar to what you tried to do yourself, right? So what is it that's?
Yeah, but they got it right.
What's the it? What's the it? What's the challenge?
The difficulty is that things change from week to week, and you see those the lines. The top line is the scope, the plan scope, right? The lines of projected burn up and actual burn up and the trend line, they all meet exactly at the scope line. In Excel, you get it right for a snapshot, and then things change, and the picture doesn't look as pretty anymore. Don't try it. Do not try this at home.
It's a lot of overhead.
Get Rally.
Yeah. Version one.
It's if you love Excel.
Go for it.
I spent a lot of time, but what I really should have done is to ask the what are they called, the user groups, the communities, the Excel community, for help, as I have with other problems. But do not try this at home.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, along these lines, have you ever used, or anyone here, Jira Portfolio?
Yes.
With Atlassian? Yeah, so how has your experience with that been? Is it for like release planning and like forecasting?
Not deep enough to answer the question intelligently. Does anybody else have experience with Jira?
Version 1 makes a plugin for Jira that does, I think when you talk, because I understand the portfolio piece of all that, but that's, version 1, there's a plugin that you can use that actually kind of expands out what Jira does as far as, I'm going to say program level. In other words, they have a program board. And
They
also,
do now, yeah.
Yeah, and also portfolio level stuff that you can do. In Jira things are kind of organized around projects, so this kind of takes it and gives you a different look.
So, because I thought the portfolio product for Jira was supposed to do that, but we haven't used it. Like, we just got it, but it hasn't had a
That's brand
successful
new.
rollout.
That's
It is
like
new.
brandy new too, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Meanwhile, version 1 has made tremendous advances in the past 6 months.
Okay.
In the past year, I think you agree, because they didn't have the portfolio initiative or theme initiative feature story hierarchy until June of last year. I think, well, why not? But they didn't. They got there.
Okay.
It's What tool now?
I was simply going to suggest some resources. Stack Exchange now has a dedicated area for project management, and the other place I go to is Stack Overflow.
And you get what?
You can post questions there and get answers.
Like this impossible stuff? Or what?
Depending upon how coherently you can phrase the
opinions.
question, yes, and sometimes you wind up in offline discussions coming out of posted questions.
Oh, like what experience have you had with Jira's portfolio? That kind of question.
I don't know that you'd be getting into that versus the more purely technical aspects of trying to get the deficiencies of the moving target in Excel.
Yeah, the Excel user forum. There
That
must
would
be
still be another one as
guys,
well as
must be
Microsoft.
guys that know how to solve that problem.
Yes.
But who cares anymore? You get Rally and,
What did you generate that with?
what?
Is that from Rally?
No, it's from Excel.
He did actually figure it out.
He worked it out.
I was going to say Visio.
I got it right just that one time.
Okay, sure.
Next week, we update the velocity and it goes bluey.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, other thoughts about what we've talked about, Bill?
Could you tell us a little more about cost of delay?
Sure.
All right. And if we use this, are we like to have to explain what this whole cost of delay is to the guy who writes the checks?
Well, you can attempt it, but you're going to lose them in
Yeah.
the first 30 seconds.
They might not have heard of it. The financial
might not
people,
have heard of it.
They don't even use the concept.
Right. And so these are, the statements here are pretty appropriate to introducing the idea. I mean, what are we talking about? It's the economic value lost if you're late. Release to manufacturing, deployment into a market window, a trade show, the competition coming out with something close but not, And the point that I made about the funnel is the cost of delay is a systematic way of ordering choices, sequencing and ordering work. And so here's some examples. You have different durations of the work and equal costs of delay. So what are you going to do?
I have a question.
If you take,
I don't understand, and hopefully I'm not the only one that doesn't understand, but that number 3, the cost of delay for project 1.
Yeah.
How did you derive that number?
Fibonacci numbers. Actually not Fibonacci numbers because there's a 10 in there. But they're arbitrary numbers, relative numbers.
The relative numbers about some economic, it's basically money, the economic
Money.
cost of being
Right.
late for
Value.
project 1.
Right.
Okay.
You have a reference number in there somewhere that's 1, and relative to that, the duration, okay? So if you take the longest job first, why you would ever want to do that if you're agile? Because you want to shorten the time to feedback, and the longest job first just doesn't make sense in that context. But so okay, shortest job first. It gets a little more complicated if you have equal durations but different costs of delay, and so. Your intuition may lead you wrong. The math says get the highest delay cost out of the way. The project with the highest delay cost right away, out of the way first. Actually, that's intuitively right, isn't it, Lauren?
Right.
Intuitively, you would do that.
I would think.
Right.
And then you have the weighted shortest job first. And this comes from the Black Swan farming guy. there's a nice article. To just Google it, black swan farming, and you get the basis for this this picture. You can actually build up and see what happens with this technique. And again, these are the components: user value, time value, learning value. If you can get dollar numbers in there and not Fibonacci, that would be terrific. But after all, you're after not absolute estimates here. Your objective is to sequence work, the order, the prioritization, and that doesn't have to. And it's really painful for people to give you dollar numbers, because there's a lot of fear behind that. So this is the kind of the easier, softer way of doing it.
Just for clarification, for Fibonacci numbers, you basically just throw numbers into a random number generator and just randomly plop in whatever you like.
Well, actually, the Fibonacci sequence is 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 20.
Divided by
and
1
so
in
on.
itself.
No.
Divided by 1 in itself.
No.
No,
That's
prime.
okay.
That's prime.
So, like, if you know that Project A is 5 times
Some of them are prime,
Project
some of them are
B,
not. What?
So if you know Project A is 5 times bigger than Project B, you would just use the Fibonacci numbers and not use that knowledge that Project A is bigger.
Why not use the knowledge?
Okay.
This kind of fits in with scale. Fibonacci is really nice for scaling between each of the subsequent numbers. They tend to fall into that pattern, right?
I think Alan probably knows this. The Fibonacci sequence was designed so that each successive number reflects twice the value or twice the work, twice the difficulty. So, yeah, what John says is probably viable. And so my point that I've been making, you do it qualitatively, you can do quantifiable values, you can tune with adjusting factors. You know, anybody familiar with the Carl Wiegers weighting system? Carl Wiegers, this is going back.
He spoke here years ago.
He did?
Yeah.
He was one of our speakers years ago.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Now you've forgotten everything he said.
He moved out of New York, so he doesn't.
We had it on our previous,
It's on the website.
on our
his
previous
system is-
presentations. Our old yeah, Neil.
His system has a
He's
scaling,
to the Agile Manifesto, am I wrong?
Yes, you know. I know.
possibly.
Was an early
Possibly.
Agile guy.
No.
Anyway, it's the reward for doing something and the penalty versus the penalty of not doing it, and you can assign weights. If the reward is more important than yeah, good. And so it's collective judgment and that. Other thoughts?
So the biggest challenge I think we've had is when we're trying to do like initial forecasting, because it's so far in advance, you really don't have that much information on like the stories that you're forecasting. A lot of our like engineers are like they're very reluctant at first to give you like any story point estimate. So I think that was like, I think during like our first sessions, it was after they did it a couple times, like went through it, got easier, but that's like the
I
hardest.
think Andrew's example.
That's the building of trust.
Yeah.
It's the eliminating that dysfunction of the team. Sorry, Alan.
I was just going to say affinity mapping works very well too. You know, put
Yes.
things up there,
Yes.
look at it. Let's say, you know, again, the idea is here we want to be approximately right, not exactly wrong. And let's see, small, medium, large, and let's build an affinity map of what we're doing. This way, you know, you can visualize it, and then you know, you're starting somewhere in the funnel, you know, and then you work your way down. Because engineering is, you know, this thought that we have to be very exact and precise and precision about what we're doing. With this is fuzzy math.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And affinity mapping, like other techniques, takes it out of, it makes it nonverbal. people are reluctant to say things, but they're not as reluctant to move Post-its, stickies on a board. Works for retrospectives as well. Take it out of the verbal. I think we're about there. Yeah?
Couple minutes.
I wanted to
Yeah.
ask about, I've heard about some estimating techniques of teams to go through, to arrive at, say, at this collective intelligence and arrive at sort of an estimate the team will buy into with, you know, with back and forth discussion about where they differ from the different. I forget the name of it. It's one where you, well, sort of one version of it is planning poker, but there's something that is based on this. I think it was developed by the Navy to estimate where subs would have ended up if they were going at a certain velocity and then they were lost. You know, they were, and engineers figuring out together in a room, and they wouldn't try to influence each other. They just each come up with privately a number. Then they'd all share their number, so you have the highest and lowest person on the outliers, right? And everyone is in between. So you'd have the outliers explain where they came up with their assumptions, and the team would agree or disagree, and then they'd estimate again. I forget what that's called. But
Give it to the Parade with Delphi.
Delphi,
That's on there, right?
yes. I was trying to get to Delphi. Yeah, that's
Is that
got
relevant to-
a very honorable history.
The Oracle of Delphi.
But estimation is a totally different. You realize that the assumption here is that everybody agreed on how big the features were and so forth. The estimation was a given for the forecasting. It's a whole different story. You bring it up.
Unfortunately,
Maybe you can get somebody to talk about estimation next time.
Yeah.
All right, I'm getting the hook. Right? Good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.